There is a moment, somewhere in the space between the second alarm and sitting up, when you realize the night did not do what you needed it to do. The body moved through hours of darkness, and yet the weight is still here, settled into the chest, as if something was never set down. What science has found in the last decade is stranger and more generous than most people are ever told. While you lie still, the brain undergoes something that looks less like rest and more like deliberate construction. Cells contracting, channels opening, fluid moving through spaces that only appear in the deepest quiet. The body does not wait to be asked. It has been doing this your whole life. In the dark, without instruction. What sleep hypnosis offers is not control. It is permission, a language the architect already working inside you can receive, so that when the walls come down tonight, what gets rebuilt is exactly what the quiet was always for. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. One question follows us into the dark if your brain already knows how to heal itself. What has been getting in the way? Let the breath find its own length. There is nothing to do here, but be still. The work has already begun. You have felt it. The heaviness that waits for you when you wake, even after a full night. Science has a name for this. When sleep architecture is present, but its restorative process is incomplete. Cortisol, the stress hormone that rises with prolonged strain, begins to rewire the very stages where repair occurs. Over time, it closes the channels that were meant to stay open. Your exhaustion is not a character flaw. It is a signal from a system that has been working against resistance, trying to tell you something about what it needs. Every waking hour, the brain generates metabolic byproducts, the residue of thought, of emotion, of ordinary consciousness doing its work. Research from the University of Rochester, with findings extended through recent years, identified that among this residue are amyloid beta proteins and tau, compounds associated with cognitive decline when they accumulate over time. The clearing of these compounds does not happen while you are awake. It happens only in the deep quiet you are entering now. The brain was designed to clean itself. Tonight is when it gets to. Inside the skull, there is a system most people were never taught about. Scientists named it the glymphatic system, drawing on the glial cells that manage it and its resemblance to the lymphatic network that clears waste from the rest of the body. Unlike its counterpart, it has no dedicated pump. It runs on something simpler and more elegant: the slow, synchronized waves of deep NREM sleep. When those waves arrive, the spaces between brain cells widen. Fluid begins to move. The night begins its actual work. During deep sleep, brain cells physically shrink. In animal studies using 2-photon microscopy, this contraction has been measured at up to 60% of cell volume. Findings researchers believe apply in human sleep as well. What this shrinkage creates is space. Channels where cerebrospinal fluid can pass through tissue it cannot reach during waking. The brain does not make room accidentally. It makes room deliberately, and only when the pressure of conscious activity has fully released. What you call falling asleep, the brain calls opening the gates. The fluid that moves through those gates is cerebrospinal fluid, caesus, clear and nearly weightless, circulating through the ventricles of the brain and around the spinal cord. During waking, it flows slowly. During deep NREM sleep, a landmark study published in the journal Science in 2019 showed that CSF movement surges and pulses in direct synchrony with slow brain waves. Each wave is a gentle push. Each push carries away a little more of what the day left behind. Your brain is not at rest tonight. It is rinsing itself clean. Among the things being cleared is the downstream residue of cortisol, the stress hormone that, when released in sustained bursts through a demanding day, actively disrupts the architecture of deep sleep. It suppresses stage 3. It fragments the slow wave periods, when glymphatic flow runs highest. This is the mechanism behind waking exhausted, not that sleep was absent, but that cortisol kept the gates from fully opening. What you carry when you are tired is not a record of how little you slept. It is a record of how long the system worked against a door that would not open all the way. Sleep hypnosis, the gentle kind being used tonight, works through a mechanism more structural than mystical. In the hypnagogic state, the transitional zone between waking and sleep, the prefrontal cortex begins to quiet. The prefrontal cortex is the brain filter, the region that evaluates, critiques, plans, and worries. When it steps back, suggestions that reach deeper structures arrive without being screened. This is not manipulation. It is the temporary removal of a gate the mind installed to protect you. Tonight, with your permission, that gate is simply being set aside. Milton Erickson, the psychiatrist who reshaped how clinicians understand hypnotic suggestion, built his entire method around one observation: the unconscious responds to permission far more readily than to command. His language never ordered. It offered. When a voice says, "You might notice your breathing slowing," something in the nervous system hears an option and chooses it. When a voice says, "Breathe slowly," the critical mind can simply resist. The blueprint your brain receives tonight is written in that same language. The language of invitation, not instruction. Your body holds a kind of memory that the thinking mind does not. Interoceptive patterns, sensations stored in the muscles, the gut, the fascia, the tissues, accumulate beneath conscious recall. Researchers studying the body internal sensing have found that experiences never fully processed during waking hours leave traces in the nervous system, ongoing response. Deep sleep is one of the primary windows during which that processing can be completed. Tonight, the body gets the quiet it has been waiting for. What the science keeps circling back to. Underneath every mechanism, the healing was never waiting for your instruction. What we are moving through tonight is not how to force a process. It is how to stop interfering with one. The cortisol that narrowed the channels. It is easing. The prefrontal filter that kept the blueprint from arriving. It is stepping back. What opens in that easing is not something new arriving. It is something very old, doing exactly what it has always known how to do. Stage 3, NREM, slow waves. The oscillations that drive glymphatic flow originate in the thalamus and cortex working in synchrony. They move at less than 1 cycle per second, a rhythm so slow it is almost imperceptible. Like a tide pulling back in complete darkness. Each full sleep cycle runs approximately 90 minutes. Within the first cycle of deep sleep, cortisol levels begin their steepest drop of the entire night. The night was architected for your recovery before you ever lay down in it. Fear, threat detection, emotional reactivity. These are managed in part by the amygdala, one of the structures most actively processed during sleep. It also receives clearing support through glymphatic flow during NREM. Studies tracking emotional reactivity after disrupted stage 3 sleep consistently show amplified amygdala response the following day. That rawness, that lower threshold for overwhelm, it has a physical address. And tonight, the fluid is already moving through it, running from the brainstem through the chest and into the abdomen. The vagus nerve is the primary channel of the parasympathetic nervous system, the body-dedicated pathway for rest. During deep NREM sleep, vagal tone increases, heart rate slows, digestion softens, the breath grows longer, a steady rhythm, a familiar presence, a voice that signals safety. These are the conditions that allow vagal tone to rise. The body finds this on its own. Once the noise quiets enough for it to remember that it knows how. Sleep architecture follows a pattern, but not a rigid one. The proportion of deep NREM to REM shifts with each cycle. Stage 3 dominates the early part of the night. REM expands as morning approaches. The heaviest glymphatic load falls on the first half of sleep. Physical repair happens first. Emotional processing follows. You do not manage this sequence. It was built into the structure of every night before you were born, waiting for the chance to run without interruption. Emerging fMRI evidence suggests that as slow waves build during the first descent into stage 3, prefrontal activity does not simply quiet. It appears to undergo a structured redistribution. Functions that were being held consciously, the monitoring, the checking, the vigilance, transferred temporarily to subcortical structures, older and, for this task, more capable. The brain does not shut down at night. It hands things off. What you release, something else catches. During NREM sleep, the default mode network, the brain regions most active during rest and self-reflection, shows suppressed activity. Upon entering REM, it re-engage, often in the context of memory consolidation and emotional simulation. This cycling, suppression then re-engagement, appears to be part of how the brain updates its model of who you are, threading the day events into the longer narrative of a life. Sleep is not a pause in your story. It is where the story gets written. Internal sensations, the ones beneath ordinary attention, are processed at greater depth during sleep than during waking. The insular cortex, which tracks the body's internal states, remains active across sleep stages in ways suggesting it attends to what never surfaced during the day. The tightness in the chest without a name, the held breath no one noticed, the place in the shoulders that never quite released. Sleep visits these places, not to solve them, to acknowledge them. That acknowledgement is itself part of the clearing. When trauma has not been integrated, it leaves traces in the stress response system. The HPA axis, the network governing cortisol release, can become chronically sensitized, triggering cortisol in response to stimuli that carry no actual threat. This is why sleep in those circumstances feels thin, fragile, easily broken. The architecture is intact. The alarm keeps going off. What tonight offers is not the repair of the alarm, only enough quiet that the body can begin deciding, on its own, that the alarm was wrong about the time. Central to memory formation, the hippocampus is among the most metabolically active brain regions during waking hours. Intense activity generates significant metabolic waste. Without adequate stage 3 sleep, that waste accumulates. And this is associated with the kind of cognitive fog that makes an ordinary day feel heavier than it should. The clarity you are drifting toward is not manufactured. It is what remains once the residue is washed away. The hippocampus has been waiting for exactly this. The shift from waking into deep sleep is not a single switch. Adenosine builds through the day, creating sleep pressure. Norepinephrine drops as arousal falls. Serotonin shifts from mood regulation towards sleep architecture support. GABA, the brain primary inhibitory signal, rises to quiet the neural chatter. Sleep hypnosis works in part by amplifying the GABA-ergic signals already present in the hypnagogic state. The voice, the rhythm, the pace. These are additional cues telling the brain it can safely stop its vigilance. You are not being told to sleep. You are being reminded it is safe to let it happen. The lymphatic system, vessels, nodes, fluid moving waste toward the bloodstream, has been understood for centuries. What Maiken Nedegard Laboratory at the University of Rochester described in 2012 was something else entirely, a parallel system inside the brain itself, using completely different channels, running only during sleep. Most people alive today were educated before this discovery existed. The most important cleaning system in the body was invisible to science until recently. What else about your own healing might still be waiting to be named? Core body temperature drops approximately 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the hours following sleep onset. This is not incidental. It is regulatory. The temperature reduction appears to facilitate the slow-wave activity that drives glymphatic flow. Environments that stay too warm interfere with this drop, disrupting stage 3 before it can deepen. The faint coolness you might feel pulling a blanket closer is the body thermostat doing exactly what it was built to do, engineering the internal conditions that repair requires. That breath you just heard described, the exhale longer than the inhale, the rest and digest rhythm the body already knows. It is already finding you. You did not have to start it. The system simply needed room. Something about the question we came in with is beginning to change shape, less something to answer, more something to inhabit. The next stretch follows what happens when the body has enough space to take the repair further. Let it. The relationship between emotional memory and sleep is more malleable than early research suggested. Sleep can modify the emotional tone of a memory, whether an experience is tagged as threatening or safe, without erasing what happened. Research into targeted memory reactivation during NREM has demonstrated reductions in the emotional charge of a memory, while the factual content remains intact. What the brain does during deep sleep is not simply store the day. It edits how much it costs to carry it. Norepinephrine, the neurochemical tied to alertness and the body threat response, drops to near zero during REM sleep. This absence is what makes REM the window where emotional memories can be revisited without triggering the full stress response they carry while awake. You can return to something difficult in a dream without the heart rate spike you would feel remembering it at noon. REM sleep is the brain-own processing session. It schedules itself every night, whether or not you are aware of attending. When the prefrontal cortex quiets, the body stops distinguishing clearly between imagination and experience. A scene described with enough sensory specificity produces genuine physiological response. Heart rate adjusts. muscle tension shifts, skin conductance changes. This is the mechanism behind hypnotic suggestion effectiveness. The blueprint being offered tonight: warmth, safety. The brain working without interference is not metaphor for the body. The body does not process it as metaphor. It responds as if it is happening, because, in the most important sense, it is. Hundreds of times each night during stage 2, NREM, the brain generates sleep spindles, brief oscillatory bursts lasting half a second to 2 seconds. Each spindle transfers a packet of information from the hippocampus to the neocortex memories, moving from temporary to long-term storage. Skills consolidating, emotional context reorganizing. The night is the most active filing system in existence. It runs without supervision, in the spaces between one thought and the next, carrying forward what the day built. Sleep debt, accumulated through insufficient or disrupted rest, was once thought fully recoverable with a few nights of extended sleep. More recent research has complicated this. Acute sleep debt can largely be repaid, but chronic suppression of stage 3, repeated across weeks and months, appears to leave traces in both glymphatic function and the stress response architecture. Recovery is real. It is also cumulative. Every night of genuine deep sleep is a deposit into something the body has been trying to rebuild. Tonight is a deposit. Connective tissue, fascia, surrounds and runs through every muscle, organ, and nerve in the body. Practitioners in structural bodywork and interoceptive research have observed that chronic stress patterns are held in fascial tension, creating restrictions that affect both physical movement and the nervous system's sense of safety. During deep sleep, muscle tone decreases and the body genuinely loosens in ways waking rest does not produce. The places you carry tension without knowing it are, right now, beginning to receive something they have been waiting a long time for. The enteric nervous system, the neural network lining the digestive tract, communicates continuously with the brain via the vagus nerve, forming what researchers call the gut-brain axis. During deep NREM sleep, gut motility shifts. Microbiome activity patterns change, and this signaling continues. It is part of why poor sleep affects digestion, mood, and immune function simultaneously. Gut and brain are not separate systems that happen to share a body. They are one continuous conversation. Sleep is when that conversation becomes most honest. Sleep and immune function are so intertwined that researchers now describe their regulatory systems as co-evolved. Stage 3 NREM triggers the release of growth hormone, interleukin-1 and interleukin-6, and immune modulators supporting tissue repair and inflammatory regulation. In one well-replicated study, a single night restricted to 4 hours of sleep reduced natural killer cell activity to roughly 70% of baseline. The protection you carry through each day is manufactured largely at night. You are not just resting, you are being resupplied. Chronic pain, the kind with no clear injury, that shifts and persists, has a documented relationship with disrupted deep sleep. Stage 3, deprivation can create pain sensitivity even in people with no prior chronic pain history. Conversely, improving deep sleep is associated with reduced pain perception. Sleep does not numb the nervous system. It recalibrates the threshold for pain, returning it toward a baseline that accumulated exhaustion had moved in the wrong direction. At the base of the brain, the hypothalamus coordinates much of what sleep accomplishes: sequential hormone release, body temperature regulation, gating of external stimuli that might otherwise cause waking. It is the master timekeeper of the body maintenance schedule, overseeing dozens of processes simultaneously, none of which require your awareness or direction. It does its best work when left alone to manage its own sequencing, which is exactly what is happening right now, even through closed eyelids. Specialized photoreceptors in the retina, intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, remain sensitive to light wavelengths. Low-level ambient light during sleep can suppress melatonin and disrupt the timing of sleep stages. Darkness is not merely the absence of visual input. For the sleeping brain, darkness is an active signal, the body's oldest cue that the environment is safe, that the demands of the day have withdrawn, that the long, generous work of the night can now proceed without interruption. Deep in the brain center, the pineal gland produces melatonin, a hormone not of sleep itself but of darkness. It communicates to the body that night has arrived, triggering a cascade of neurological and hormonal changes that prepare the system for deep rest. Melatonin levels typically peak between 2 and 4 in the morning, then fall toward dawn. Whatever the clock says outside, something inside you tracks a rhythm older than any clock. You are inside that rhythm now, moving with it, carried by it. Glymphatic clearance varies with sleep position. Research in rodents, with emerging human correlates under investigation, found that lying on the side produces more efficient CSF flow than back or stomach sleeping. The glymphatic channels appear anatomically positioned to take advantage of gravitational assistance in the lateral position. This is a finding recent enough that most medical education has not yet incorporated it. The body has always been ahead of the textbook. It continues to know more than we have managed to write down. Perceived safety produces physiological changes as real as perceived threat. When the nervous system receives consistent signals that the environment is secure, familiar rhythms, steady temperature, known voices, the HPA axis downregulates, cortisol secretion decreases, and the parasympathetic system takes over. Safety is not a feeling. It is a measurable biological state, produced by conditions rather than willpower. The conditions tonight have been arranged. The body is reading them. It is already responding accordingly. According to Porges' polyvagal framework, the autonomic nervous system operates across 3 states: ventral, vagal, social engagement and safety, sympathetic, mobilization and threat response, and dorsal vagal, shutdown and freeze. Deep, restful sleep is most accessible from the ventral vagal state, where the body feels held and safe enough to fully release vigilance. A calm and familiar voice can facilitate this transition in a way silence sometimes cannot. The nervous system is a social organ. It tends to rest more completely when it knows it is not alone. Each time the sleeping brain revisits a memory, that memory becomes temporarily unstable, open to revision before it is stored again. Memory reconsolidation during sleep allows the brain to update a memory emotional weight, its contextual associations, its relationship to what came before and after. This is not distortion. It is integration. The stories you carry about yourself are not sealed at the moment they form. They are revised, night by night. in the direction of who you are still becoming. During stage 3, NREM, growth hormone release drives cell turnover, collagen synthesis, and wound repair at rates the waking body cannot match. This applies not only to skin but to every tissue that sustains daily wear: muscle fibers, gut lining, vascular walls. Sleep does not divide its attention between activity and repair. It redirects the resources that were serving wakefulness entirely toward reconstruction. Sleep is not recovery time placed after the work. Sleep is the shift when the real work gets done. Unlike every other sense, smell has a direct neural pathway to the amygdala and hippocampus. Bypassing the thalamic relay, all other input passes through first. This is part of why smell is the sense most powerfully linked to emotional memory. During sleep, olfactory processing continues at low levels, and researchers have used gentle olfactory cues during NREM to tag memories for emotional reprocessing. The sleeping brain is not sealed. It remains softly connected, enough to be reminded, not enough to be disturbed. During deep sleep, the heart rhythm grows not just slower, but more coherent, a state measured as high heart rate variability, or HRV. High HRV during sleep is among the most reliable markers of cardiovascular health and nervous system resilience. Low HRV, the pattern produced by chronic stress and disrupted sleep architecture, is associated with increased vulnerability across a range of conditions. The heart coherence during sleep is not incidental. It is the rhythm the whole system synchronizes to. Tonight, that rhythm is finding its way back to itself. The sleeping brain continues to process language. EEG studies have shown that even during stage 2 NREM, the brain responds differentially to words it has been primed to track. Not waking, but registering. This is part of how hypnotic suggestion in the hypnagogic state can continue influencing neural processing as deeper sleep arrives. The words offered tonight do not require your full attention. A part of you that does not need permission to listen is already doing so. Feeling not quite like yourself, disconnected from the person you recognize in better moments. Emotionally flat or reactive, without clear cause, has a neurological correlate in disrupted interoceptive processing. When chronic stress compromises the nervous system capacity to read the body internal states accurately, the sense of self becomes unreliable. Deep NREM sleep appears to recalibrate this accuracy. The return to yourself you have felt after a genuinely good night of rest is not imagination. It is the body's signal that its instruments have been retuned. Like many organs, the kidneys follow a circadian rhythm. Antidiuretic hormone rises during sleep, reducing urine production while the body directs energy towards cellular repair. Every system that was running for alertness during the day begins now shifting toward restoration. The whole organism is in on it. Not just the brain, not just the immune system, but the kidneys, the gut, the liver, the skin, all of them receiving the same signal that the waking shift is over and the repair shift has begun. Adequate REM sleep supports emotional regulation, the capacity to experience difficulty without being overwhelmed by it, to return to baseline after distress, to hold ambiguity without it becoming unbearable. Studies measuring emotional regulation after disrupted REM show reduced flexibility, increased rumination, lower tolerance for uncertainty. The exhausted mind is not weak. It is working with equipment that has not been serviced. What tonight restores, in part, is the equipment itself. The neural architecture that makes it possible to carry difficult feelings without being defined by them. The nucleus accumbens, the brain primary reward center, shows altered function after sleep deprivation. In well-rested individuals, it activates proportionally to actual reward. In sleep-deprived individuals, it overactivates, driving compulsive behavior, impulsive decisions, reduced satisfaction from rewards that would have felt sufficient the night before. What felt like a wanting problem was, in part, a sleeping one. The thermostat for enough was disrupted by the same forces that disrupted the sleep. What you just heard, that the capacity to carry difficulty without being defined by it is something the brain rebuilds during sleep, not something you maintain by effort. May have landed somewhere specific, maybe in the chest, maybe in the jaw, or the hands. Let it land. Do not move it. The body is doing something with that recognition right now, in a way that was not possible while the day was still running. The second half of this night follows what happens when the interference finally stops long enough for the process to complete itself. Something has shifted across this last stretch. From the original question outward, we came in asking what message to send to the brain healing system. What has emerged instead is a different understanding the system does not need a message. The cortisol that closed the channels was a message. The vigilance that kept the filter engaged was a message. The belief that exhaustion is personal, a failing rather than a consequence of architecture, was a message. What runs the repair is not a directive. It is the absence of interference. That is what this night is offering. And something in you that has been listening, even without being asked, already knows exactly what to do with the quiet. The nervous system regulates how much pain signal reaches conscious awareness through descending inhibitory pathways. Roots running from the brain down to the spinal cord that literally turn down the volume on incoming pain before it arrives. Adequate deep sleep reinforces these pathways. Sleep deprivation reduces their inhibitory power, which is one reason chronic pain and chronic poor sleep form a cycle so difficult to interrupt. The path out of that cycle runs through the same slow waves that are already building in you right now. Deep sleep is not a uniform quiet. It is structured oscillation, slow waves, spindles, and K complexes, each serving a distinct function in the processing chain. K complexes are single large waves that arise spontaneously during stage 2, appearing to function both as protective mechanisms, suppressing awareness of mild external stimuli, and as active memory processing events. They occur thousands of times per night. You are producing them now. The brain needs no instruction to do this. It has been practicing this pattern since before you were born. Creativity and sleep are connected through a mechanism less commonly discussed than the link itself. During REM sleep, the brain associative constraints loosen. Concepts that waking logic holds apart find unexpected connections. Problems that resist solution during the day are sometimes restructured during sleep into arrangements that make resolution possible. The insight that arrives in the morning is not inspiration coming from nowhere. It is the night work becoming visible at the moment of waking. Sleep consolidates motor memory, the ability to perform complex physical skills without conscious attention. This consolidation extends beyond athletic skill to the physical language, of emotional expression, the posture of calm, the muscular patterns of ease, the somatic vocabulary of feeling safe in a room. Sleep rehearses the body way of being over many nights. The body that wakes is increasingly the one that sleep has been practicing. During waking, the thalamus routes sensory information from the body to the cortex for processing. During sleep, its function shifts. It begins generating the rhythmic activity that drives sleep oscillations, and it grows less receptive to incoming signals from outside, a process called thalamic gating. This gating is why sleep remains possible in a world that does not go quiet. The thalamus turns down the outside so the inside can attend to its own work. Early research suggests oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, plays a role in sleep regulation that science is only beginning to map. Some findings indicate oxytocin activity during sleep is associated with deeper, slow-wave periods and improved emotional processing upon waking. The conditions of warmth, familiarity, and steady presence, even when provided by a voice and a rhythm rather than a person in the room, appear to support the very architecture that makes deep sleep possible. Being accompanied into sleep is not weakness for the nervous system. It may be optimal. Hyperarousal, a state of persistent, elevated alertness, is now understood as a primary mechanism of chronic insomnia rather than merely a symptom of it. In hyperarousal, the HPA axis stays active at night. Cortisol remains elevated when it should be falling, and the brain capacity to generate the slow waves needed for glymphatic flow is suppressed. This is the architecture of lying awake with an exhausted body and a mind that will not stop. The body wants to sleep. The alarm is still running. Tonight is practice for teaching the alarm what time it actually is. The insula, tucked within the lateral sulcus of the cortex, associated with body awareness and the experience of emotion, shows distinctive activity shifts across sleep stages. During NREM, insular monitoring decreases, allowing the body internal signals to settle rather than being continuously assessed. This reduction is part of what allows muscle tension to release and the sense of watching yourself from a slight distance to fade. The body relaxes more completely when it is no longer being observed. Sleep gives you privacy from your own vigilance. Research into the sleep of people who have lived through significant trauma has found that stage 3 NREM, the slow-wave deep sleep that drives glymphatic clearance, is the phase most disrupted. Trauma does not primarily disturb dreaming. It disturbs the quiet. The stage designed to clear the residue of difficult experience is the very one that difficult experience makes hardest to reach. But this also means that access to stage 3, through the gradual recalibration of the nervous system, through felt safety, through hypnotic facilitation, is the most direct path toward what the body has been trying to do all along. Neuroplasticity, the brain capacity to reorganize its structure and function in response to experience, does not pause at night. Sleep-dependent neuroplasticity is one of the primary mechanisms through which learning, emotional processing, and recovery from difficulty produce lasting change. Synaptic connections formed during the day are pruned and strengthened during sleep, with the most important ones reinforced by glymphatic clearing of the molecular debris the day activity generated. What you practice today, even the practice of lying here and allowing the body to release, is being written into the brain structure right now. The cerebellum, associated primarily with coordination and motor timing, is also involved in emotional regulation and social cognition in ways neuroscience did not appreciate until recently. During sleep, emerging research suggests cerebellar activity contributes to the consolidation of what might be called emotional procedural knowledge, the body-learned understanding of how to navigate relationships, how to read a room, how to hold firm or soften at the right moment. Rest makes you more socially capable, not less. The blood-brain barrier, the cellular membrane regulating what passes from the bloodstream into neural tissue, is supported in its integrity by adequate sleep. Sleep deprivation increases barrier permeability, allowing inflammatory molecules into neural tissue. This is one mechanism linking chronic poor sleep to neuroinflammation, and neuroinflammation to depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. The brain capacity to protect its own chemistry is maintained, in part, by the quiet you are in right now. Light, temperature, and nutrition are the three primary Zeitgebers, the German word for time givers, that synchronize the body circadian rhythms to the 24-hour cycle. Of these, light is most powerful. In its absence, lying in the dark as you are now, the internal clock's own oscillations take over. What remains is the rhythm set by biology, the mammalian night, the ancient pattern of repair that your ancestors inhabited, that the cells of your body expect, that your nervous system has been waiting to return to since this morning. Sleep and identity are more closely linked than they might appear. The continuous sense of being someone, with a history, values, preferences, a recognizable self, is maintained in part by the nightly consolidation of autobiographical memory. Sleep threads the day events into the longer narrative of who you are. Without adequate sleep, this threading becomes unreliable. Events feel disconnected. The sense of continuity dims. The feeling of being recognizable to yourself grows harder to access. Adequate sleep is not just restoration. It is the maintenance of your coherence as a person. Social pain, the distress of rejection, isolation, loss, disconnection, activates many of the same neural regions as physical pain, and is processed during sleep in similar ways. REM sleep, low norepinephrine environment, allows emotionally painful memories to be revisited and their charge gradually reduced. This is why sleeping on a difficult situation genuinely helps. The brain distinguishes, in the space of a night, between what matters and what was simply acute. The morning perspective is not naivety. It is the result of a process that ran while you rested. The superior temporal gyrus, involved in processing the emotional content of speech and sound, appears to remain active during sleep in ways suggesting the brain continues evaluating auditory input for emotional significance. Research on this is still developing, but it may be part of why tone matters as much as content in sleep hypnosis. The nervous system registers warmth before it registers meaning. Safety is not a concept the sleeping brain processes. It is a signal the sleeping brain detects in the first syllable. Growth hormone, the primary driver of cellular repair and tissue regeneration throughout the body, is released in its largest single pulse of the entire 24-hour cycle during the first episode of Stage 3 NREM sleep. This pulse cannot be stored. It cannot be rescheduled. Each night is the only opportunity for that night release. A single night of genuine deep sleep produces measurable changes in tissue repair markers. Its absence is felt in the body, in the skin, in the sense of physical solidity. The following day, alexithymia, the reduced capacity to identify and articulate one's own emotional states, is associated with disrupted sleep architecture, and the relationship appears to run in both directions. Disrupted sleep reduces interoceptive accuracy. Reduced interoceptive accuracy makes sleep less restorative. The body needs some degree of access to what it is feeling in order to process it. Sleep creates the space, the quieting of external demand, in which that access becomes possible. What was too much to feel during the day becomes available in the dark. REM sleep is driven by the cholinergic system, the network of neurons using acetylcholine as their primary signal. During REM, acetylcholine rises sharply while norepinephrine and serotonin quiet, creating the distinctive environment of dreaming, highly associative, emotionally resonant, spatially vivid, temporally fluid. This is not an accident of inactivity. It is a specialized state maintained by precise neurochemical regulation, evolved to accomplish something the waking brain cannot. A well-rested amygdala activates in proportion to the emotional significance of a stimulus, then returns to baseline quickly, a pattern associated with resilience. After disrupted sleep, this calibration shifts. The amygdala responds more intensely and returns to baseline more slowly. The reactivity that exhaustion produces is not a personality trait. It is a physiological state. And physiological states change with conditions. What feels like being overwhelmed by yourself may, in part, to be the simple consequence of running the system without maintenance. Inside sleep, the body experience of time changes. The external anchors of waking, clocks, light, sound, social demand, fall away, and the body moves by biological time, the rhythm of cellular processes, hormone release, temperature fluctuation. This is why sleep can feel both endless and instantaneous from the inside. Something is running, but it runs by a different standard. The slow, generous standard of repair, which has no urgency, which has always had exactly as much time as it needs. The retrosplenial cortex, less commonly discussed but central to spatial navigation, autobiographical memory, and the integration of past and future, shows increased activity during certain NREM phases. Emerging research suggests this relates to the contextualizing of new memories, placing the day events within the larger map of who you are and where you have been. The brain is building the architecture of your life while you rest. The places it is choosing to strengthen tonight are the ones it assessed, with a care you did not need to direct, as most worth keeping. The experience of feeling genuinely lighter on one side of a difficult period than the other has a neurological basis that sleep-dependent processing helps create. It is not simply the passage of time that heals. It is the processing that sleep enables across that time, gradual revision of emotional memory. The steady reduction of cortisol's structural grip on the amygdala and hippocampus, the nightly rewriting of which experiences cost how much to carry. Healing is measurable. It shows up in how the brain represents the past, and the mechanism runs, quietly and persistently, every night. The astrocytes lining the glymphatic system are not passive channels. They actively reshape themselves. widening or narrowing the perivascular spaces through which CSF flows, in response to signals from neighboring neurons. The glymphatic system is not a drain. It is a responsive one capable of prioritizing, accelerating, or modulating its own flow based on what the brain has been doing. The intelligence operating here is not the kind that requires intention. It is the kind that simply knows, and acts on what it knows without waiting to be asked. What this long stretch of facts has been arriving at, piece by piece, you were not built to require effort to heal. The glymphatic system does not need your motivation. The immune cascade does not need your intention. The emotional processing of REM sleep does not need your participation. What each system requires is access. The architecture of deep sleep, which is itself simply the absence of what was preventing it. The laboratory was never waiting for your instructions. It was waiting for your permission to close the door. What is running in you right now? The astrocytes reshaping themselves. The fluid moving through spaces that only open in the deepest quiet. Is running without your direction, the way a tide comes in without being called. What has been gathering across this long stretch is arriving at one quiet place. The system was never waiting for you to figure out what it needed. It was waiting for you to stop standing between it and the work. You do not have to hold this. What is happening is happening. The last stretch holds that. The capacity for repair is not diminished by the weight of what needs repairing. Research on sleep-dependent emotional processing has found that more emotionally significant experiences, those carrying greater distress, greater confusion, greater unresolved weight, are allocated proportionally more processing resources during REM sleep. The hardest things you carry are the ones the brain works hardest on in the night. You are not too much for the system. You are exactly what it was built for. Acetylcholine sharpens focus during waking. During sleep, it drives the associative, integrating, narrative work of REM. The same chemical that helped you attend to what mattered today is now helping the brain weave it into something coherent. The body repurposes its tools across the 24 hours. What served alertness at noon serves healing at midnight. Nothing is wasted. In regions of chronic stress, the cerebral cortex gradually thins over months. In regions associated with consistent rest and positive experience, it thickens. This structural change, measurable with MRI, is among the clearest demonstrations that sleep is ongoing construction, not maintenance. The brain you will wake with is being shaped right now. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the direction of something more resilient than the one that lay down. Long before the capacity to reason about safety existed, the body's subcortical structures were already evaluating the environment and deciding when to release vigilance. Darkness, warmth, a familiar rhythm, a steady voice. These are signals the oldest parts of the brain recognize without needing to think about them. They do not need convincing. They need reminding. The body knows what safety feels like. It is feeling it now and responding accordingly. Neuropeptide Y, involved in stress resilience, appetite, and anxiety modulation, is released during deep NREM sleep and is associated with reduced fear response and improved recovery after adversity. People with higher baseline neuropeptide Y activity show greater psychological resilience. Sustained sleep deprivation depletes this system, the steadiness that allows you to face what is difficult, the resource that lets you remain yourself under pressure. Is in part. A molecule that sleep produces. Right now, you are being replenished at the level of chemistry. Waking from deep sleep often brings brief disorientation, heaviness, a slow return of awareness. This is called sleep inertia. It is caused by the gradual reactivation of the prefrontal cortex after its period of reduced activity. The grogginess is not a sign something went wrong. It is the signature of having been genuinely elsewhere, in a state far below the surface where waking thought operates. The mind takes a moment to return because deep rest is, in fact, deep. Telomeres, the protective sequences at chromosome ends, whose length is associated with cellular longevity, are partially maintained by the repair processes of sleep. Chronic sleep deprivation is associated with accelerated telomere shortening. Adequate sleep is associated with their preservation. Every night of genuine deep sleep is maintenance at the level of how long your cells remain viable. You are not just resting. You are tending to the architecture of how long you stay you. The sleeping brain is not trying to block out sound. It is evaluating sound for threat. Rhythmic, predictable sounds at low volume, or a familiar voice maintaining a steady pace, are processed in ways that support, rather than disrupt, sleep architecture. This is the mechanism behind white noise, lullabies, and spoken word sleep content. A voice that consistently signals safety is a voice the sleeping brain can eventually stop evaluating and simply receive. The precuneas, associated with self-awareness and the sense of being an agent in one's own experience, shows marked deactivation during deep NREM sleep. Its quieting distinguishes the absence of self-consciousness in deep sleep from the vivid self as character of dreaming. In deep sleep, there is no one standing apart from the process to evaluate it. This is not loss. It is the most complete form of rest there is, a rest from the weight of being a self. The claustrum, a thin sheet of neurons whose function remained unclear for decades, has been proposed as a possible coordinator of conscious awareness. During deep NREM sleep, its activity drops significantly. While the science is still developing, this suggests that the sense of everything happening at once, the constant integration of input into a coherent world, may be gently suspended during deep sleep. What takes its place is not chaos. It is a quiet coherence that has nothing to prove and nowhere to go. In the liver, metabolic and detoxification processes follow strong circadian rhythms. Hepatic enzymes shifting their activity across the 24-hour cycle in response to both the body, internal clock, and feeding patterns. Research in chronobiology has established that these functions are most active during the rest and fasting phase of the day-night cycle. While exact timing varies by individual and condition, the principle holds. The liver's most intensive chemical processing aligns with the hours of sleep. The quiet of the body surface is the liver's busiest shift. Each night, the hippocampus replays the day experiences in compressed, accelerated form, a process called hippocampal replay, observed directly in rodents and inferred in humans through EEG and fMRI patterns. This replay is not random. It prioritizes experiences tagged as emotionally significant, unresolved, or connected to existing knowledge structures. The brain reviews not what was loudest in the day, but what was most important. And importance, in the sleeping brain, is measured not by urgency, but by meaning. What the night keeps returning to is what the night is working to understand. The concept of earned rest, the culturally pervasive idea that rest must be justified by sufficient prior effort, has no correspondence in the body physiology. The glymphatic system does not verify credentials before opening. The immune cascade does not assess whether you worked hard enough before releasing growth hormone. The body repair processes are unconditional. They have always been unconditional. The judgment about whether you earned your rest is a cultural layer installed over a biological reality that simply does not agree. What the body offers is not a reward. It is what the body does. Interleukin, an anti-inflammatory cytokine, is produced in higher quantities during adequate deep sleep. Chronic sleep deprivation is associated with reduced interleukin-10 and elevated pro-inflammatory markers. The inflammation that poor sleep promotes is systemic, affecting brain, cardiovascular system, gut, and skin. The calm you feel in the body after a night of genuine rest is not subjective. It is a measurable reduction in the molecular state that fatigue and disruption produce. The stress response system, HPA axis, sympathetic nervous system, immune threat response, evolved to handle acute challenges and then return to baseline. It was not designed for sustained activation. Chronic stress holds it in readiness it was never meant to maintain. Sleep is the mechanism of return, the nightly discharge of accumulated activation, the reset that allows the next day to begin from something closer to capacity. Without it, the baseline drifts upward. With it, it comes back. Not all at once, but consistently, in the direction of enough. Research on post-traumatic growth, the psychological development that sometimes follows significant adversity, suggests that sleep quality during the period after a difficult experience predicts whether it leads toward growth or chronic impairment. Not because sleep makes difficult things not matter, because sleep provides the neural architecture for integration, the capacity to hold what happened and continue building a life around it, rather than around avoiding it. Rest is not the opposite of processing difficulty. It is what makes processing possible. Clusters of neurons in the brainstem, called the raphe nuclei, produce serotonin. During waking, they support mood, attention, and appetite. During NREM, their activity decreases. During REM, they fall nearly silent, contributing to the distinctive neurochemical environment of dreaming. The serotonin that supports waking life is not unlimited. It is produced, regulated, and partially replenished during the quiet the raphe nuclei themselves require. Functioning is not the alternative to rest. Functioning depends on it. During REM sleep, the default mode network runs without the interruptions that task demands create during waking. In ordinary consciousness, the task-positive network frequently overrides the DMN whenever attention is redirected outward. In REM, the task-positive network is quiet, and the DMN can follow its own associations without interruption. This is the neural condition for narrative, for the brain to build stories, to understand the self in relation to others, to find the shape of things. Dreaming is the brain's most unconstrained attempt at meaning. Research on social cognition has found that REM sleep is when the brain rehearses how to be with people, processing social scenarios, navigating remembered conflict, updating models of how others think and feel. You are practicing, during sleep, how to be with the people you love, how to read what is not being said, how to remain yourself in a difficult conversation. The warmth you sometimes feel upon waking, toward people, toward the day, is not coincidence. It is partly assembled in the dark. The long arc repair that sleep provides, across weeks and months of consistent rest, accumulates without announcing itself. It shows up in resilience, cognitive reserve, emotional flexibility, a nervous system that has had enough time to complete what it started. Someone who has slept consistently well across a sustained period is measurably different from someone who has not, in how the brain responds to pressure, in inflammatory markers, in the capacity to remain who they are when things become hard. This is not destiny. It is chemistry. And chemistry responds to conditions. The condition you are in right now is the one the body has been waiting for. The final phase of the glymphatic cycle. CSF, carrying the night, accumulated waste toward the cervical lymph nodes and into the bloodstream. Peaks in the later hours of sleep, often in the early morning. Cutting sleep consistently short means missing this final sweep. What you give to the full night is not just more hours. It is the completion of the process, a cycle that runs all the way through. Tonight is a cycle running all the way through. Neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, occurs in the hippocampus throughout life, a finding that overturned decades of scientific certainty when it was confirmed in the 1990s. Adequate sleep, regular movement, and sustained low stress are the three most robust predictors of healthy hippocampal neurogenesis. Each night of deep sleep contributes to the creation of neural cells through which you will form new memories and maintain the flexibility associated with mood stability and resilience. You are not just preserving what you have, you are growing new capacity. The markers of genuine recovery: reduced cortisol, restored HRV, replenished growth hormone, cleared metabolic waste, do not require your awareness to accumulate. They do not require that you felt yourself healing, or knew what phase you were in, or believed the process was working while it happened. The body does not need your agreement to repair. It only needs your presence. Your willingness to stay still long enough for the tide to come in all the way. What your body knows how to do. It learned before you did. How to regulate temperature, how to route blood, how to clear the brain waste, how to process what the day left behind, how to strengthen what matters and dissolve what does not. These are not skills you developed. They are capacities you were born with. Running beneath awareness. Doing work that consciousness neither directs nor could improve upon. What tonight asks is not complicated. It is the oldest and most natural thing to stop. And let the body be what it already is. You do not have to earn what is already happening. You did not need to have had a good day to deserve the glymphatic clearing, the immune cascade, the slow and faithful restoration of what the hours used. The body has never operated on those terms. It has always offered this, every night, to every version of you, in whatever condition you arrived. The message you came here wondering how to send is already inside. It has always been. It says, I am here. I am still. The rest is yours. Picture the cerebrospinal fluid, clear, unhurried, already moving through channels the brain opened for it, finding each quiet place and doing what it came to do. Let that same unhurried quality move through you now. Something that was held is already loosening. not because you released it. Because the system that knows how to release it was finally given enough room. There was never a condition on this rest. There has never been a condition on this rest. There are people who spend years searching for what the body offers every single night, a process that asks nothing of you except your absence from it. The exhaustion that brought you here. The waking into weight. The sleep that never quite finished what it came to do. Was not a life sentence. It was a system working with closed channels. Channels. It turns out, open. What tonight gave you was not information about healing. It was the experience of getting out of the way far enough for healing to run. The glymphatic tide moved. The cortisol fell. The filter stepped aside and handed things to something older and, for this particular work, far more capable. You did not have to do any of it. You only had to be here. That is the quiet truth this night kept returning to the system, was never waiting for your instructions. It was waiting for your trust. If you would like to know what comes next in this series, the details are in the video description below. The next video is there whenever you are ready to find it. The fluid is still moving, unhurried, complete, asking nothing of the night but time. Let the breath fall into its own length now, slower than thought, longer than the last one. What is running in you has never needed your permission to run. Let it run. That is all. Let it be true of you, right now, without any effort from you at all. If sleep has already been here for a while, let it have you fully. You came in carrying more than could be named. You can set it here. What is working in the dark knows exactly what to do with it. And if your eyes are still closed and the night still holds hours, those hours are not empty. They are full of exactly what you need, running exactly as it was designed to run. Good night.